Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and having learned quite a few things from, through, and from within human interactions, and having pursued and completed my master's in business administration and in clinical psychology, and having had the chance to work as a counselor and as a therapist over the last few years, I today wish to talk about the impact of excessive consumption of short-term video contents on our psychological and our relational well-being. And I'd even reframe that to say on our psychological, on our emotional, on our mental, and thereby our relational well-being. So firstly, when we say excessive consumption or overconsumption, what tangible parameter, at least to some degree, can we determine, can we take note of, that would be categorically called as excessive or over? And from the little research that I did, it comes to watching short form video contents for an hour or 2 hours every single day or most days. So intentionally watching it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes may not necessarily be that problematic. But when 5 minutes or 15 minutes leads to an hour or 2 hours, that is when it starts to become problematic. That is when it's excessive consumption or overconsumption, which is why it's also called as doom scrolling. And in a way, it's actually leading us towards our own doom, psychologically, emotionally, and relationally, which is why it's also called as binge watching. Now, just like binge eating is unhealthy, for it's mindless, it's excessive, it's overdoing something to avoid something else. In a similar way, binge watching is mindlessly watching, is mindlessly scrolling, is mindless consumption through our audio visual faculties to kind of avoid feeling something, to kind of avoid addressing something. Now we all know, or at least most of us would be aware in terms of the information, not necessarily emotional awareness, not necessarily embodied awareness, but awareness just with regards to information, wherein the way then it translates it, yes, I'm aware that these things happen, because of doom scrolling, because of binge consumption of short-term video contents. But that doesn't happen to me. It happens to people who are not me. It doesn't really affect me, but it affects everyone else, which is exactly, unfortunately, how we think about all of the worst case situations that happens to everybody else outside of us, including death. But unfortunately, doesn't happen to us. We are informatively aware of it, but we are not emotionally aware of it. We are not aware of it in an embodied way, wherein we have embodied the experience to call it a personal experience, through which I have personally gained some insight. So we all would be aware that heavy consumption of short-form video contents or excessive consumption or overconsumption, however we wish to label it, leads to cognitive overload. Leads to too much of information that our senses and our brain and our nervous system has captured and has not had the time to process it, to deal with it, to feel it. But it's actually like a ping pong ball that kind of goes tack, 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 tack. And imagine this kind of information being dumped or being absorbed by our senses, by our nervous system, by our brain, for an hour or two or even more, and not having the time to assimilate it. Quite naturally, it's exactly going to function like that washing machine that has been clearly given the instructions, on which the instructions are clearly written that it can handle 6.2 or 5.8 kgs of wet weight, of wet clothing. And thereby, if we overload it, it stops to move, it stops to rotate, or it keeps getting stuck. And that is exactly what happens to our nervous system, to our digestive system, to our blood system, wherein it gets overflooded and thereby overstressed, unduly stressed, leading to distress. Now, any kind of a chronic distress or prolonged stress over a longer period of time, inhibits our critical thinking skills, inhibits our working memory, inhibits long term planning, and invariably also exaggerates our short term attention span. It does not enhance long term focus but enhances short term focus. And anything naturally which then demands attention for a longer span, which then demands us to respond in more mature ways, us to work more patiently, not tolerantly, but more patiently, also then drops down, also reduces. Excessive or overconsumption of short term video contents also, in a way, spikes up the chemical dopamine in our bodies. Now, dopamine in the right proportion is a motivation hormone, is a motivation chemical. It motivates us to do something. But when overconsumption floods a stream, it motivates us for those split seconds wherein we suddenly get a high and then it comes down. Then we get a high, then it comes down. And in a way, it does not then keep us motivated to do things on a longer term because it's training our nervous system, it's training our brains and our bodies and our senses to keep getting those small hits that work for smaller time, that work for small time frames, that work for small attention span, but does not keep us motivated over longer periods of time. Also, when I earlier mentioned that it causes distress or chronic stress over a longer period of time, we'll also notice that our levels of feeling drained out, of burnt out, goes high as well, happens faster as well. We'll also notice that doom scrolling or binge scrolling also becomes very compulsive when we do not have any autonomy over that, wherein we don't have any deliberate choice over that, intentional choice over that, which looks very similar to somebody who deals with addiction, wherein they don't have any autonomy or choice over the substance of their choice. Now, whether that's short form video contents or its substance, right from cigarettes to alcohol, to weed to cocaine to heroin, or to watching porn, or to compulsively working, which is also called as workaholism, or to compulsively shopping, or to compulsively eating, or to compulsively going from one relationship to the other, also shows us one's inability to sit with themselves, because sitting with themselves is much more uncomfortable than engaging in any of these activities or a few of these activities. Now, if we can connect all of these dots together, we'll understand that right from the last one that I mentioned was trying to escape our own selves or the discomfort of being with our own selves, to not having control or charge or one's autonomy over themselves, over their senses, or to chronic overload of senses, which causes distress, also then loops up in causing some spectrum of anxiety. Or anxiety disorder, some spectrum of depressive disorders. some spectrum of demotivation, which leads to a feeling of meaninglessness in one's life. In a way, unknowingly, unconsciously, because of such sudden hits of dopamine and such spike downs and spike ups, we also train ourselves, once again unknowingly, unconsciously, to create more drama and more chaos in our lives, to live with and to experience and to embody more drama, more chaos in our lives. Because once again, when we are engaging or overly engaging, excessively engaging in these kind of activities, primarily over here, excessive consumption of short-term video contents, which goes like the ping pong ball, cut, 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 cut. And if we do it for way too long, it never happens that our nervous system, our brain, our sensory systems, our bodies will function a particular way only when we are on the screens. But then it'll drop all of this and function in a more relaxed, in a more harmonious, in a more attuned way, in a more present way in our social interactions within our relationships, in a more patient way in our relationships. If we have trained it, if we have gotten addicted to the ping pong machine, it has quite literally embodied it and made it a part of the body's reaction, body's expectations, which is how it will exactly function, or at least in a lot of ways function in relationships as well. It'll never go from this place where it's consuming or excessively consuming social media, where the ping pong ball goes cut, 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 to then going into social interactions within personal relationships and come across and behave like a smooth, flowing, calm, grounded, embodied, attuned, present reality. Over here also it will carry the same expectation, because that is where it then begins to feel the dopamine hit. And in a way, unfortunately, to a large degree, unknowingly, unconsciously, it adds stressors in our relationships. Because it reduces our attention span. It reduces our attention span in relationships as well, which is where disattunement begins to happen, which is where we begin to feel that the other person is not attuned with us, is not present with us, at least emotionally and mentally, which is where we'll also hear a lot of people saying, they barely know anything about me, implying they barely know me. It also reduces our attention span and our patience to sit with our own selves, because that would require us to sit with our own discomforts also, to feel our own discomforts with ourselves also. And since that's painful, many of us would rather avoid it than be engaged with it, than be engaged with our own selves. Now I'd like to share up my personal example over here, that at one point in time, very intentionally, I had taken up the activity of doom scrolling, of binge scrolling. And I had thought that I would continue this just for a few days, to realize that it didn't last for a few days, but ended up lasting for a few weeks. Wherein somebody, personally me, who enjoyed listening to podcasts, to long-term videos, who enjoyed reading books, watching movies, had a hard time, had difficulty focusing and attending to long formatted conversations after having doom scrolled, not for a week, but maybe for a few weeks. I had to retrain myself to engage, to attune, to be present, to be attentive towards long formatted conversations, to grasp in the details, to not want to take shortcuts, to not look for instant gratifications, to not look for quick fixes. I had also personally noticed that I had become a lot more impatient in my interaction with others and even with myself, that I had a hard time sitting with myself and journaling, which I have been practicing for so many years now, that after having left it just for a week or 2 weeks, I found it challenging to come back to it. To self-reflect became difficult. After having taken up that challenge or that exercise or that experiment of doom scrolling, of binge watching short form video contents, I also realized that when people were interacting with me, a part of my brain, a part of my nervous system would go, can they just finish it fast? Can they stop their crying? Can they stop their whining? Because that actually felt like whining to me at that point in time, which would then result in me tuning out, which naturally meant that I was not present, I was not engaged with the other person. And naturally, it never happens that the other people are not aware of it, are not able to notice that. And if that had continued over a longer period of time, I might have lost some of my closest relationships. I might have lost the meaningfulness within those relationships. I might have lost my support system. I might have lost the people who actually took interest in knowing me. Because trying to know anybody, including ourselves, takes time, takes patience, takes insight, takes attention, takes attunement, takes presence. Then be attuned to our own selves. Some studies have also found that constant scrolling or excessive scrolling or binge scrolling or doom scrolling also leads to procrastination. And if we actually observe ourselves, we'll notice that the days we have overly consumed short-term video contents for an hour or 2 hours or more than that, we have procrastinated taking certain decisions and actions. And over a period of time, if we chronically do it, if we excessively do it over a long stretch of time, we'll notice that some of the major life decisions that we needed to take at some point in time, we have pushed them onto the back burner. We have avoided taking them because they felt uncomfortable, because they felt too challenging. And maybe a few people might end up feeling the boat has already sailed, and maybe even looked in for the support that could have helped me take that decision and that action at that point in time, rather than pushing it aside every single day, one little step at a time, wherein today I feel it's too late. Short-term video contents also in a way reduces our ability to grasp the context behind the content, the backdrop on which the content is being said, is being expressed, is being explained. And without the entire understanding of the context, it then comes across like the joke, which I used to hear when I was a kid, which goes something like this. After hearing the entire Ramayana, the person asks, were Ram and Sita siblings? पूरी रामायण सुनने के बाद सामने वाला पूछता है, राम और सीता भाई बहन थे? And metaphorically speaking, it goes something in the similar manner, wherein we don't understand the entire thing, but jump to making conclusions way too quickly, which then is not talking about responsibility, thereby responsibility, but our reactivity. And reactivity is not necessarily about samajhdari, is not necessarily about mindfulness and thoughtfulness, and which is why it then learns to take in shortcuts. It trains our nervous system to take shortcuts and to make conclusions way too soon, way too fast, in a reactive manner, as something being the absolute truth or being absolutely false, as something being absolutely correct and being absolutely wrong, thereby limiting and reducing our critical thinking faculties, our critical thinking abilities. And not just that, but even our long-term planning, intentionally, deliberately. And in order to understand that, let us personally reflect whenever we have shared short-term video contents with somebody, with anybody, or we have watched it ourselves. Have we truly, honestly, taken out the time to go through the entire content and the context of that conversation? of that long form video content, either as a vlog or as a movie or as a podcast communication? Or have we just made our conclusions and our assumptions, thereby our biases, based on that very small content, wherein the context is completely missing? It, in a way, also trains us to look for quick fixes, and more so in keeping with relationships, in keeping with interpersonal relations. Because for a very brief point in time, for a very brief period of time, we feel at least it's been sorted for now. And then the same thing comes up again, maybe after a day, maybe after 2 days, maybe after a week. And then we repeat the same thing and say, at least it's been sorted for now, without actually going into the root cause of the problem itself. Because that would require patience, that would require critical thinking skills, that would require us to get the context of the person and the relationship and their personal experiences, which quite naturally, many a times, will feel uncomfortable and will require us to feel the feelings to be able to deal with them, which would require us to process that information as well, which would require us a level of patience that has eroded from our sensory, from our nervous system as well, and would need to be restored. And short forms don't help us develop that. Which is why I'll also personally state over here that it is one of the reasons, despite having gotten feedbacks from a lot of people advising me, suggesting to me to make short form video contents, to make reels, I have very deliberately stayed away from taking that route. It's not any form of avoidance, but rather it's me wanting to engage with myself, with my content, with my words, with my thoughts, and with others a little more mindfully, a little more attentively, a little more engagingly. Also, constantly scrolling on these short-term video contents or short-term pleasures, short-term dopamine spiking and flooding in factors. In the short term is one of the brilliant coping mechanisms of being in denial. For denial helps to block or to avoid the intense and painful feelings and emotions of anxiety, of fear and terror, of shame and guilt, of grief and sadness, and of desperation and hopelessness. Let's try and take a closer look as to how binge scrolling or pleasure scrolling is leading towards the death of our relationship with ourselves and with others, is leading to the death of presence with ourselves and with others, is leading to the death of meaningful relationship with ourselves and with others. And what is it within ourselves that we are trying to avoid, that we are trying to not face for short-term pleasures? Let's examine ourselves and our relationships a little more closely to be able to understand this interaction. Let's try and do that for ourselves, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.